Jackson Garcia pulled his dusty pickup into the driveway, the engine rattling to a stop after a grueling 14-hour shift pouring concrete under the Houston sun. His shoulders ached, his boots crunched with dried mud, and all he wanted was a cold beer and a quiet evening. The suburban street was still, save for the hum of a distant lawnmower and the faint bark of a neighbor's dog. He grabbed his toolbox from the truck bed, its weight familiar in his calloused hands, and headed toward the house he'd called home for 8 years. The front door swung open before he reached it. Tina, his wife of 6 years, stood in the doorway, arms crossed, her posture rigid with accusation. "You're tracking dirt again, Jackson," she snapped, her voice slicing through the evening air. "Do you even care about this house?" He froze mid-step, the toolbox thudding against his leg. "Tina, it's just dust. I've been on my feet since 4 a.m., pouring concrete in 97-degree heat. Can we skip this tonight?" Her eyes narrowed, unyielding. "Skip it. You waltz in here like this is a construction site, not our home. I'm the one scrubbing your mess while you play martyr." Jackson set the toolbox down, forcing a slow breath. "I'm not asking you to scrub anything. I'm asking for 5 minutes of peace when I walk through the door." Tina stepped forward, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "Peace? You're gone before dawn, back after dark, and you think bringing home a paycheck entitles you to a parade? I'm not your maid, Jackson." The words stung, but he held his ground. "I ask about your day, Tina. Every night. You just never answer unless it's to tear me down." She laughed, sharp and bitter. "Oh, please. You think you're special because you work hard? Newsflash, every man does. But you act like I should bow down for it." The argument escalated, voices rising until they echoed down the street. Jackson gestured toward the neighboring houses, their blinds twitching with curious eyes. "You're turning our marriage into a sideshow for the whole block to watch." "Good," Tina shot back. "Maybe they should see what I put up with." Before he could respond, she grabbed his duffel bag from the porch, his spare work clothes, his old photo of his dad, his life, and hurled it onto the lawn. The bag landed with a dull thud, spilling socks and a cracked picture frame across the grass. "Take your junk and go," she shouted, loud enough for the entire neighborhood to hear. Jackson stood rooted, staring at the scattered pieces of his world. Neighbors lingered on their porches, some pretending to water plants, others openly staring. He knelt, gathering his belongings, when soft footsteps approached. "Need a hand." The voice was calm, warm, a stark contrast to Tina's rage. Jackson looked up to see a woman, mid-30s, holding a watering can, her presence steady and unintrusive. "I'm Natalie Ramirez," she said, extending a hand. "Just moved in across the street." He shook her hand, his grip firmer than he expected. "Jackson, sorry you had to see this." Natalie crouched beside him, picking up a stray shirt. "No need to apologize. I heard enough to know this isn't your fault." She paused, her tone careful. "I've seen some things, though. A black BMW pulling into your driveway late at night when your truck's gone. Thought you should know." Jackson's stomach twisted, but he kept his face neutral. "How often?" "A few times. Always after midnight." She didn't push, just handed him the shirt and stood. "I've got a spare room if you need a place to crash. No pressure." He looked back at the house. Tina had slammed the door, the porch light flickering as if mocking him. The weight of Natalie's words settled in. BMW, late nights, Tina's hostility. Something wasn't right. He nodded slowly. "Let me grab my stuff." They crossed the street together, Jackson carrying his duffel, Natalie holding the broken picture frame. Her house wasn't grand, but it felt alive, warm lights spilling from the windows, the faint smell of rosemary from her garden. She set his things by the couch. "You're not imposing," she said, reading his hesitation. "I've been where you are. Sometimes you just need someone to not make it worse." Jackson managed a tired smile. "Thanks. Smells like you're cooking something better than my microwave dinners." "Lasagna," she said, heading to the kitchen. "Made it when I saw the chaos out there. Figured you could use a meal." As they sat at her small dining table, the lasagna steaming between them, Jackson felt the tension in his chest loosen, just a fraction. Natalie didn't pry, didn't fill the silence with empty chatter. She just ate, occasionally glancing at him with quiet understanding. For the first time that night, he didn't feel like an intruder. "You said you've been there," he ventured, setting down his fork. "What happened?" Natalie leaned back, her fingers tracing the edge of her plate. "Another city, another man who thought promises were optional. I left when I realized I deserved better than fighting for someone who'd already checked out." Jackson nodded, her words mirroring the ache he hadn't named. I thought Tina and I were building something. Now it feels like I'm the only one holding the hammer. She met his gaze, unflinching. You can't build alone. And you can't stay where you're not wanted. The truth landed hard, but it didn't break him. It clarified something. He glanced at his duffel, the broken frame poking out. That BMW, he said quietly. I need to know more. Natalie nodded. I'll help. But tonight, just eat. You've got a roof, a plate, and time to figure it out. He took a bite, the warmth of the food grounding him. Outside, the neighborhood settled into silence, but inside, a spark of resolve flickered. Tina's betrayal was no longer just a suspicion, it was a lead. And Jackson wasn't about to let it slip away. Jackson woke to the smell of coffee brewing in Natalie's kitchen, the faint clink of a mug against the counter pulling him from a restless sleep. The guest room's bed was firm, the sheets crisp, and for a moment, he lay still, staring at the ceiling, piecing together the wreckage of the previous night. Tina's words, the duffel bag on the lawn, Natalie's mention of a black BMW, they churned in his mind like gravel under tires. He swung his legs out of bed, his work boots still caked with yesterday's concrete, and headed downstairs. Natalie was at the stove, flipping eggs with a practiced hand. Morning, she said without turning, sliding a plate toward him. Fuel up. You've got a long day. He sat, the warmth of the plate grounding him. You didn't have to do this. She shrugged, sitting across from him with her own coffee. I know what it's like to wake up wondering if you're the problem. A decent breakfast helps clear the fog. Jackson took a bite, the eggs savory and perfectly cooked. He appreciated her straightforwardness. No pity, just practical kindness. That BMW you mentioned, he said, setting his fork down. You sure it wasn't a delivery or something? Natalie's eyes met his, steady and unflinching. It parked in your driveway at 1 a.m. 3 nights last week. No delivery guy lingers that long. Tina let him in every time. The words hit like a dropped hammer, sharp and heavy. Jackson leaned back, his jaw tightening. I need to see it for myself. She nodded, pulling out her phone. I've got a security camera on my porch. Caught the car twice. Want the footage? He hesitated, then nodded. She tapped her screen, and soon, grainy video played. A sleek black BMW pulling into his driveway, its headlights cutting through the dark. A man stepped out, tall, clean-cut, moving with the confidence of someone who belonged. Tina appeared at the door, ushering him inside without a glance at the street. The timestamp read 1:17 a.m. Jackson's chest tightened, but he kept his voice even. Can you send me that? Already done, Natalie said, her tone matter of fact. What's your next move? He rubbed his knuckles, the calluses rough against his skin. I'm not storming in like a fool, but I'm not ignoring this either. I'll watch tonight. She didn't argue, just refilled his coffee. I'll keep the light on if you need a place to land. That evening, Jackson parked his truck 3 blocks away, the engine ticking as it cooled. He sat low, his phone propped on the dashboard, camera ready. The Houston night was sticky, the air thick with the threat of a storm. His house looked deceptively normal, porch light flickering, mailbox stuffed with bills bearing his name. But normal was a lie, and he knew it. At 12:43 a.m., headlights swept the street. The BMW rolled in, parking crookedly across his driveway. Tina stepped onto the porch, barefoot, her silhouette sharp against the light. She scanned the street briefly, then waved the driver inside. Jackson's grip tightened on his phone as he snapped photos, the flash off to avoid detection. The man moved quickly, his stride casual, as if this was routine. The door closed behind them, and the house swallowed their secret. Jackson sat there, the photos burning a hole in his pocket. He didn't feel rage, just clarity, cold and unyielding. Tina wasn't just pushing him out. She was building a life without him in the home he'd poured his sweat into. He drove back to Natalie's, the streetlights blurring as his mind raced. She was waiting on her porch, a glass of water in hand. Saw anything? She asked, her voice low. He showed her the photos, his fingers steady despite the churn in his gut. Same car. Same guy. She didn't even hesitate. Natalie studied the images, then handed the phone back. You've got proof now. What's the plan? I'm not rushing in, he said, leaning against the porch railing. She wants me gone, fine. But I'm not leaving empty-handed. That house, that life, it's half mine. I'll talk to a lawyer tomorrow. She nodded, approval in her eyes. Smart. Fight with facts, not fists. They sat in silence for a moment, the crickets filling the gap. Jackson's mind shifted to the years with Tina, the early days of shared coffee, late-night talks about dreams they'd since abandoned. He'd thought they were building something unbreakable. Now he saw the cracks she'd hidden. "You ever confront your ex?" he asked, breaking the quiet. Natalie sipped her water, her gaze distant. "Once. He lied to my face, said I was paranoid. I walked away and never looked back. Truth hurts, but it's cleaner than living a lie." Jackson nodded, her words settling like a blueprint. "I'm done being the fool. She can't rewrite this story." The next morning, he called a divorce attorney, a no-nonsense woman named Carla who'd been recommended by a coworker. Over coffee at a diner, he laid out the photos, the footage, and the years of Tina's escalating disdain. Carla listened, jotting notes, her expression unreadable. "You've got a strong case," she said, tapping her pen. "The house is in both your names, and this evidence suggests infidelity while you were still cohabiting. Texas courts don't take kindly to that. You want full ownership?" Jackson nodded. "I built that place, literally. Poured the driveway, fixed the roof. I'm not letting her take it." Carla slid a card across the table. "File these by tomorrow, and we'll push for a quick hearing. Stay calm, stay out of her way, and don't give her ammunition." Back at Natalie's, Jackson felt a shift. The weight of betrayal hadn't vanished, but it was no longer crushing. He was moving forward, not just reacting. Natalie was in her backyard, wrestling with a loose fence post. He grabbed a hammer from his toolbox and joined her. "Need a hand?" he asked, already driving the post deeper into the ground. She grinned, wiping sweat from her brow. "You're gonna fix my whole house at this rate." "Least I can do," he said, hammering steadily. "You gave me a place to think straight." As they worked, the fence post sinking firmly into place, Jackson felt something he hadn't in years. Purpose. Tina's betrayal had torn down his old life, but he was already laying the foundation for a new one. One where he wouldn't beg for respect. Jackson sat in his truck, the engine off, parked just beyond the glow of a streetlight 2 blocks from his house. The Houston night buzzed with distant traffic, but his focus was razor-sharp on the driveway ahead. His phone rested on the dashboard, camera ready, timestamp ticking. Natalie's words about the black BMW echoed in his mind, urging him to act, not react. Tonight, he wasn't just gathering evidence, he was reclaiming his truth. At 12:57 a.m., the BMW slid into the driveway, its engine purring as it parked at an angle, one tire scuffing the grass Jackson had mowed for years. Tina emerged from the front door, her steps quick and deliberate, no hesitation as she motioned the driver inside. Jackson snapped photos, his hands steady, capturing the man's silhouette, tall, polished, moving like he owned the place. The door closed, and the porch light dimmed, as if shielding their secret. Jackson didn't linger. He drove back to Natalie's, his pulse steady, but his resolve hardening like concrete. She was awake, sitting on her porch with a mug of tea, the steam curling in the cool air. "Get what you needed?" she asked, her voice low but direct. He showed her the new photos, the timestamps clear. "This ends now," he said, sliding the phone into his pocket. "I'm done waiting for her to rewrite the story." Natalie nodded, setting her mug down. "You've got enough to make your case. Just don't let her drag you into her chaos." The next day, Jackson met Carla, his attorney, at her office, a small space cluttered with legal files and coffee cups. He handed over the photos and Natalie's security footage, laying out the pattern: late-night visits, Tina's hostility, the public humiliation on the lawn. Carla scanned the evidence, her pen tapping rhythmically. "This is solid," she said. "We'll file for divorce and request full ownership of the house. The infidelity angle strengthens your claim. Stay out of her way until the hearing." Jackson nodded, his jaw set. "I'm not running. I just want what's mine." That evening, he returned to Natalie's, his toolbox in hand. She was struggling with a squeaky dryer in her laundry room, the machine groaning with every spin. "Need a fix?" he asked, already kneeling to inspect the belt. She laughed, handing him a screwdriver. "You're gonna rebuild my whole house before you leave." "Keeps my hands busy," he said, tightening a loose screw. Working alongside her, the air free of tension, felt like a small rebellion against the years of walking on eggshells. They didn't talk about Tina, but the unspoken support in Natalie's presence was enough. Days later, Jackson made his move. He didn't call or text Tina. He wanted the element of surprise. At 7 p.m., he pulled into his driveway, the BMW parked crookedly again, its driver inside his house. His boots crunched on the gravel he'd laid himself, each step deliberate. The front door was unlocked, as expected. He walked in, the air thick with the sound of soft music and Tina's laughter from the kitchen. She stood by the counter, a wine glass in hand, mid-sentence with a man in a crisp shirt, his tie loosened. They froze when Jackson appeared, the glass nearly slipping from Tina's grip. The man, Eric, he'd later learn, stood, his posture shifting to defensiveness. Jackson, Tina stammered, her voice high and brittle. You can't just barge in. This is my house, he said calmly, his gaze locked on hers. And you're entertaining guests in it. He pulled out his phone, displaying the photo of the BMW. This your friend's car? The one that's been parking here at 1 a.m. Eric stepped forward, hands raised. Look, let's not escalate this. Jackson ignored him, addressing Tina. You threw my life on the lawn, acted like I was the problem, but you've been inviting him in behind my back. Tina's mouth opened, then closed, her composure cracking. Eric grabbed his jacket, muttering about leaving, but Jackson blocked the doorway. Not yet, he said, his voice low but firm. The neighbors deserve to know who's been sneaking around. He opened the front door wide, letting the evening air carry his voice. This guy, he called out, pointing at Eric, has been coming to my house when I'm at work. He's not a friend. He's the reason my stuff ended up on the grass. Faces appeared at windows, shadows gathered on porches. A neighbor's dog barked, amplifying the tension. Eric pushed past, head down, and fled to his car, tires screeching as he sped off. Tina stood frozen, her hands trembling, no words left to deflect. Jackson turned to her, his tone even. You made your choice. Now I'm making mine. He walked out, leaving the door open, the murmurs of the neighborhood trailing behind him. Back at Natalie's, he sat on her couch, the weight of the confrontation settling. She handed him a glass of water, her silence a steady anchor. You okay? She asked finally. Yeah, he said, exhaling. I didn't yell. Didn't break anything. Just laid it bare. She nodded, a faint smile breaking through. That's how you take your life back. Jackson leaned back, the photos still on his phone, the lawyer's number in his pocket. The fight wasn't over, but for the first time, he felt like he was holding the tools to rebuild, not just repair. Jackson stood outside the Harris County Courthouse, the morning sun glinting off the glass building. His boots, still dusted from the construction site, felt heavier today, each step a reminder of the life he was fighting to reclaim. Inside, he clutched a folder with photos, timestamps, and Natalie's security footage, evidence of Tina's betrayal stacked neatly, like blueprints for a case he never wanted to build. His lawyer, Carla, walked beside him, her briefcase swinging with purpose. Stay focused, she said, her voice clipped. Let the facts speak. The courtroom was sterile, the air heavy with the hum of procedure. Tina sat across the aisle, her posture stiff, hands folded tightly on the table. She avoided Jackson's gaze, her lawyer whispering last-minute strategies. The judge, a gray-haired woman with sharp eyes, called the session to order, her gavel cutting through the tension like a saw through wood. Carla presented first, laying out the timeline. Tina's public outburst, the scattered belongings on the lawn, the late-night BMW visits. She projected Jackson's photos on a screen, each one a silent accusation. The time-stamped image of Tina ushering Eric into the house drew a murmur from the gallery. This occurred while the couple was still legally married and cohabiting. Carla said, her tone measured. Mr. Garcia seeks full ownership of the marital home, which he maintained and improved through his labor. Tina's lawyer countered, painting her as an equal contributor to the household. He slid a stack of documents forward, bills, receipts, a polished narrative of shared sacrifice. My client deserves her share, he argued. The house is as much hers as his. Jackson's turn came. He stood, his voice steady despite the knot in his chest. I poured the driveway, fixed the roof, paid half the mortgage. I came home every night, even when she made it clear I wasn't welcome. Those photos show she didn't just push me out. She replaced me. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. I'm not asking for punishment. I just want what I earned. The judge leaned forward, studying the evidence. Tina shifted, her hands twisting in her lap. Mrs. Garcia, the judge said, do you dispute the images? Tina hesitated, then spoke, her voice thin. It was a mistake. I didn't mean for things to go this far. The judge's expression didn't soften. A mistake doesn't erase intent. The evidence suggests otherwise. The gavel fell, granting Jackson full ownership of the house. No alimony, no drawn-out division of assets, just the keys to the place he'd built. Tina's shoulders slumped, her lawyer's protests fading into the courtroom's hum. Outside, Jackson exhaled, the folder lighter in his hand. Carla clapped his shoulder. You did good. Clean win. He nodded, but the victory felt hollow without closure. Tina approached, her steps tentative. Can we talk? She asked, her voice softer than he'd heard in years. I didn't want it to end like this. He looked at her, seeing the woman he'd once vowed to love, now a stranger grasping for control. You ended it when you chose him, he said, his tone even. I'm done carrying your choices. She opened her mouth, then closed it, turning away as the courthouse doors swung shut behind her. Back at Natalie's, Jackson found her in the backyard, hammering nails into a new garden trellis. The wood was fresh, the structure sturdy, a small act of creation that mirrored his own need to rebuild. He grabbed a hammer and joined her, driving nails with steady precision. You win, she asked, not looking up. Got the house, he said, aligning a plank. Feels more like a starting line than a finish. She nodded, handing him another nail. You're not starting from scratch. You've got ground to stand on now. They worked in sync, the rhythm of their hammers a quiet conversation. Later, over iced tea on her porch, Natalie spoke up. I fixed that dryer today. You're rubbing off on me. He chuckled, the sound easing the tension in his chest. Good. Maybe I'll learn to cook something besides eggs. She grinned, setting her glass down. Deal. But don't expect me to go easy on you. That night, Jackson walked through his house for the first time in weeks. The rooms felt empty, the silence unfamiliar but not oppressive. He ran his hand along the kitchen counter, remembering the hours he'd spent fixing leaks, patching walls, making it a home. Tina's presence lingered in small things, a forgotten mug, a scuff on the floor, but it no longer owned him. He texted Natalie, asking if she'd help him repaint the guest room. Her reply came fast. Only if you pick the color. He smiled, pocketing his phone. The house was his, but it was the connection across the street that felt like a foundation. The next morning, he drove to the hardware store, grabbing paint cans and brushes. On the way back, he passed a neighbor who waved, no longer whispering about the lawn incident. The street felt different, like it was his again. At Natalie's, he found her waiting with a ladder and a smirk. Ready to make something new? She asked. Past ready, he said, setting the cans down. They carried the supplies to his house, their steps light, the future unwritten but no longer daunting. Jackson stood on his front porch, a paint roller in hand, the late Houston sun casting long shadows across the freshly mowed lawn. The house, now legally his, hummed with the quiet of new beginnings. He'd spent the morning sanding walls, the guest room transforming under a coat of pale blue paint. Natalie worked beside him, her brush steady as she edged corners with precision. Their shared silence wasn't heavy. It was purposeful, each stroke a step toward reclaiming his space. Looks good, she said, stepping back to inspect their work. A smudge of paint marked her wrist, evidence of her investment in his fresh start. You planning to stay here long? He set the roller down, wiping his hands on a rag. Long enough to make it mine again. Maybe longer. The words carried a weight he hadn't voiced before, a commitment to himself, not just the house. She nodded, grabbing a water bottle from the cooler. You earned it. Most people would have walked away. Not me, he said, leaning against the wall. I built this place. Roof, driveway, all of it. Letting it go would have been letting her win. They finished the room by dusk, the air cooling as they hauled paint cans to the garage. Natalie offered to cook dinner, and soon they were in her kitchen, the sizzle of bell peppers and onions filling the space. Jackson chopped garlic, his knife steady despite his inexperience. You're not half bad at this, she teased, stirring the pan. Learning, he said, grinning. You're a patient teacher. Dinner was simple. Tacos, fresh salsa, no pretense. They ate on her back patio, the wooden table wobbling slightly under their plates. The night was clear, stars cutting through the city's haze. Jackson felt the ease of their rhythm, no need for grand gestures or forced conversation. It was enough to share a meal, to laugh when a stray drop of salsa hit the table. You ever think about her? Natalie asked, her tone curious, not probing. Jackson chewed slowly, considering. Tina? Sometimes. Not with anger anymore. Just like a job that didn't work out. You learn, you move on. She nodded, her fingers tracing the rim of her glass. I used to think about my ex every day, wondered if I could have fixed it. Then I realized he wasn't worth the wondering. Jackson leaned back, the chair creaking under his weight. I spent years trying to fix what wasn't mine to repair. Now I'm done apologizing for existing. The next week, he tackled more projects, repaired a loose gutter, planted a row of tomatoes along the fence. Natalie joined when she could, her presence a steady anchor. One evening, They sat on his porch, cold drinks sweating in their hands. A neighbor waved as he walked his dog, no longer whispering about the lawn incident. The street had moved on, and so had Jackson. "You're different now," Natalie said, her voice soft but direct. "Lighter, like you're not carrying someone else's weight." He looked at her, the porch light catching the curve of her hand around the glass. "You helped. Gave me a place to land when I was falling." She shrugged, a small smile breaking through. "You'd have done the same. That's who you are." The truth of it settled between them, unspoken but clear. They weren't rushing to define anything, no labels, no promises. But each shared task, each quiet moment, built something stronger than words. Jackson fixed her creaky porch step the next day. She taught him to make rice without scorching the pan. Small acts, but they added up like nails in a frame. Weeks later, Jackson heard through a neighbor that Tina had moved to an apartment across town. She tried to spin her story, claiming she'd been wronged, but the neighborhood knew the truth. Her absence left no void, just space for Jackson to breathe. He didn't gloat or dwell. He was too busy living. One Saturday, he and Natalie tackled a wobbly bookshelf in her living room. As he tightened screws, she sorted books, their hands brushing occasionally. "You ever think about starting over somewhere new?" she asked, stacking a paperback. He paused, screwdriver in hand. "Thought about it. But this place, it's home. Not just the house, but the people. You, the neighbors who didn't judge. I'm staying." She smiled, sliding a book into place. "Good. I'd miss having a handyman across the street." He laughed, the sound easy, unburdened. "I'd miss your cooking. And your company." They finished the shelf, stepping back to admire their work. The room felt fuller, not with things, but with possibility. Jackson looked at Natalie, her hands dusted with bookshelf grime, and felt a quiet certainty. This wasn't about replacing Tina or erasing the past. It was about choosing a life where respect wasn't a negotiation. That night, they sat on his porch again, the air thick with summer's end. A breeze stirred the tomato plants, their leaves rustling softly. Jackson raised his glass, a silent toast to the present. Natalie clinked hers against it, her eyes steady. "To building something real," she said. "To keeping it that way," he replied. They drank, the moment simple but profound. Jackson didn't need a grand ending, just this. A porch, a friend, a life he'd fought for and won. Tina's shadow was gone, replaced by the quiet strength of knowing he was enough.